And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this special edition episode of the Assembly Call. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. It's been a few days since we have talked. Obviously, the last time that we spoke wasn't the happiest of occasions as the Hoosiers' 2014-15 season came to an end at the hands of Wichita State. And now we enter the offseason, and what is sure to be another offseason of speculation around the Indiana basketball program, from recruiting news, potential five-star recruits that could be coming, coaching news, who will be the coach here next year, player news, who might go pro, who might transfer, all of the typical speculation that seems like it's so rampant around Indiana, especially these last few years. And so we were having a great chat on Twitter earlier tonight, and so I thought, let's try and bring that to you, round up a special edition. And I was actually able to corral two pretty awesome guests. Ryan and Andy were both unable to come. But I've got tonight Chronic Hoosier, who you all know very well, and Alex Bozich from Inside the Hall, here to just break down some of these off-season storylines going on right now with the Hoosiers. And I apologize if I look a little sweaty or a little red in the face. I was getting a workout in right before we went on here. And I don't know about you guys, but I tend to, I don't know what you would call it. You know, you got the freshman 15 when you go to college. I think during basketball season, the basketball belly, or maybe the hoop heft, maybe you would call it. But you know, it seems like these last couple of seasons have put a little more weight on me than the previous two seasons did. I know I was in the best shape of my life after the 2013 season, and now not so much. And I'm beginning to wonder if maybe the relative success of the teams has something to do with that. But alas, if you see me sweating a little bit, that's why, because I'm still cooling down from the workout. But let's get started tonight, and really, let's just go with some opening statements. I'd like to get from both you, Alex and Chronic, just kind of your opening statements as we head into this offseason. Chronic, we'll start with you. You know, a lot was made of Indiana kind of overcoming expectations, and that made this a successful season, getting to the tournament, losing in the first round. As you look back on this, do you consider the season a success, and what's kind of your lasting feeling of the 4 or 5 months that we just witnessed?
You know, the overachievement angle has been really popular of late, and it's certainly a positive way to look at things. And maybe not the most realistic way of looking at things. I mean, yes, they were ranked. You know, nobody really expected much of this team at the beginning of the year, and rightfully so after the year they had last year, and with kind of what we knew about was coming back. But then after we got, you know, through the non-conference and then into the Big Ten season, what was it? We opened up like 5-1, I think, to start the conference. In my opinion, expectations shifted at that point, which maybe makes me think this wasn't too much of an overachievement, or maybe they vastly overachieved during that early period and they just kind of hit their level later. But we certainly saw what this team was possible of. Looking at the Ohio State games, the Maryland game, it really showed us where the ceiling for this team could be. You know, granted that required a whole lot of three-point shooting, and you know, it took getting all sorts of random heckling messages right now. It also took a lot more effort, intensity, and focus on the defensive and the rebounding, or on the boards, I should say, than perhaps what we saw them finish with, at least the regular portion of the season. And while they certainly ratcheted those up a little bit, by the time conference or the postseason rolled around, I think it was by that point it was just too little, too late. You know, there was so much that had slid on the defensive end that they just weren't able to sustain it. And obviously, you can't have those record-breaking shooting nights every night. So I'm going to say, looking back, slightly underwhelmed by the result of it. It was certainly nice to make the tournament, but I felt like we had a better chance of going a little further than what we did in both the Big Ten and the NCAA tournament, based on what we had seen, you know, in the middle portion of the season.
Yeah. Alex, how do you kind of look back on it now as we're a few days removed?
I would agree with, I agree with most everything Chronic said there, just from the standpoint of when you start out 15-4 and finish, I think, 20-14. I think it maybe would have felt a little different, or looked a little different if Indiana would have maybe started out poorly and surged towards the end. But I think the way that this season finished kind of brought back the whole, teams don't finish strong under Crean talk that a lot of people have liked to go to the past couple of years. I know we've talked about that on the podcast a couple of times. And, I would say, I agree with Chronic that, getting into the tournament is nice, but I feel like this team did have more upside, especially if they could have gained any traction defensively. To me, that was really the theme of the whole season was, I remember going back to the podcast you did with Ken Palm at one point, and you asked him what was a realistic ranking for IU's defense, and he said he thought it would be somewhere in the low hundreds maybe by the end of the season just from getting into Big Ten play, and that never really materialized. And you kind of look at this team, what the offense was. If they would have gotten a defense that was in the low 100s, you're basically looking at Notre Dame. That's basically what Notre Dame is at this point, and they're a Sweet 16 team. So, it's obviously progress to get back into the tournament after missing the postseason completely last season, but not really. Just the whole way that I think that everything unfolded with losing the home games to end the season, kind of having to beat Northwestern to really save your postseason life. That's just not really the position that a lot of people I think felt that Indiana was going to be in after they got back into the top 25 and started 15-4.
Yeah, Chronic, I want to go back to something you said about the expectations. And obviously the expectation angle was much talked about, especially when Indiana started out 5-1, and it seemed like we were exceeding these expectations that in the preseason were pretty modest. A lot of people picked Indiana to finish 9th, 10th, and 11th. And I wonder, we heard after the Wichita State game, coaches and players kind of, as they look back on the season, talking about how it seemed like such a success because they had overcome these odds and overcome these low expectations and got to a place where no one really thought they would be, which in a micro sense I suppose is true when you just looked at this season, and yet in the macro sense for Indiana basketball, it seemed like this was basically just kind of getting back to what should be the standard or almost the minimum. And it seems to have led to some conversations among IU fans where we're all almost trying to figure out what we are and what's the standard and what's the expectation. And I almost looked at it as, I don't mind talking about how the team is kind of overcoming expectations, but I almost want them to feel dissatisfied with where they are, only making the tournament first round. Is that holding them to an unfair standard, or are we not holding them to a high enough standard, thinking that they should have, could have done more this year? Because that seems to be kind of this weird place that we're in, trying to figure out if we're being too harsh or not harsh enough as fans.
If you would have asked me what the outcome of this season was going to be, let's say November 1st, the day after Halloween, and said, you're going to make the NC2A tournament, you're going to win a game in the Big Ten tournament. You're going to finish 500 in conference. I probably would have viewed that as an overachievement at the time. But like I said earlier, I think we saw what this team was capable of. When they were all locked in and they were playing for one another, it was actually really pretty basketball. Mostly, the defense was really unsettling pretty much throughout. But what they lacked in the ability to get stops, they made up for in other areas, and that certainly helped compensate for it. So, yeah, but, we're not looking at this from November 1st anymore. And you can certainly say that it was remarkable that they were able to pull together what they did, considering where they started. There was talk before the season even got underway that, that Crean might get let go with the accidents and the drugs and just all the stuff that had happened since last season ended. It was certainly tenuous from the start. But then, by late January, everybody's pretty much considered IU a tournament lock. At one point, we're second in the Big Ten. And I think fans rightfully adjusted those expectations and kind of put some of that aside. And as we falter towards the stretch, I think a lot of people now are viewing that talk, the perspective that's coming out of Cook Hall that we did overachieve and we weathered the storm and we stuck together. I think the popular narrative right now among fans is we're settling. We're settling for just getting in on the bubble. We're settling for, a win over Northwestern in the tournament, in the Big Ten tournament, I should say. The Maryland game was certainly competitive, but again, we just couldn't get the stops that we needed at the end. And I think that's frustrating to a lot of folks. I mean, this season is kind of a microcosm of the Tom Crean era at IU. It's been a roller coaster from the get-go. And that's been a lot for myself included to really come to grips with. Everybody is well familiar at this point with what he started with, and certainly the rise that we saw in the 11-12 and then the 12-13 season. And then there was a huge letdown last year, both on the court as well as off, with a lot of stuff that was happening. And it brought a lot about our confidence in the program and the direction it was heading into question. And then this season kind of wrapped up all of that, where, we went from, are we even going to have this coach to start the season, to we're an automatic lock and he's not going anywhere, to we finished the season and now all of a sudden we're talking about, we're speculating about the job security of Tom Crean again. So this is kind of what we've had for the last 7 years, I guess, wrapped up in one season. And a lot of folks are maybe a little uneasy with that, questioning where this thing goes from here, whether or not he can find, more than anything, continuity from one season to the next, from one roster to the next. And there's still certainly a lot of uncertainty in the air right now with both Crean's position as well as, Yogi, Troy, and Blackman to some degree, I suppose. So I think a lot of folks are feeling like we're on uneasy footing right now with so much up in the air and having given up so much ground that we had regained.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that search for stability, and it seems like every year kind of the target changes and what the expectation is changes. And the goal, obviously, is to be where Michigan State and Wisconsin are, where the standard is a Big Ten title and being in the tournament and making deep runs. And obviously, we're hoping to get there. So hold that thought, because you may get back to that, because I think this topic of stability is an important one. But you segued us into, obviously, some big topics that we need to cover, Chronic. And so, Alex, let me ask you, I mean, the biggest topic is just who's going to be coaching here next year. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Fred Glass said a couple weeks before the tournament that Tom Crean is his guy. We haven't heard anything else, and except for that one kind of weird Monday night when there was all this chatter, we haven't heard really anything credible about rumors. I'm kind of operating under the assumption that Crean's going to be back, and there may not even be an official quote-unquote announcement, simply because an announcement was kind of already made. How are you hearing anything? How do you see it, and how should Indiana fans, I guess, be viewing the head coaching position?
Wow, loaded question. I would say at this point, I'm operating based on everything I've heard, people I've talked to, just the whole fact that he's been out recruiting. I would say that I'm operating under the assumption that he's going to be back next season. I don't have any information at this point that leads me to believe otherwise. I know it often gets into the different message board rumors and people, so-and-so's hearing this. I mean, there's only, I would say, really a handful of people that could really tell you exactly what's going on, if discussions are being had about and kind of a plan moving forward. The whole, if there's going to be an announcement that he's coming back thing, I think that kind of would go against. I kind of look at that both ways. I think it would almost go against, if you're going to keep him, do you really want to have to call a press conference to explain why you're going to do that? Also, the fact that Glass came out so strong in support of him a couple weeks ago, I guess serves as kind of, the point of reference for how he views the situation right now. And, he obviously, I think for the most part has done a really good job as the athletic director, and I think still a lot of fans are pleased with the job he's done overall. But there's just a lot of it's just a tough situation to navigate, just from the standpoint of there's been so many rumors, the Alabama thing, which obviously turned out to be false. There's been other jobs opening, and every time a job opens, people are asking, is this something he could be involved in? I just feel like if he is going to be the guy moving forward. There at least needs to be some type of we need to, there needs to be some type of resolution to the situation. Just because, if he's going to be the coach next year, then he's got to have the support of the administration. He's got to be able to recruit, because if not, then it's looking at it really kills the momentum of the program long term if he's not going to be able to go out and try to secure one of these big guys this spring. I mean, you're looking at another season next year that would be eerily similar to this one, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, Chronic, where are you standing on this right now? I mean, I think that's obviously it's a big debate with people kind of going back and forth, because on the one hand, you do see the makings of a good to potentially really good team next year, simply with a bunch of talented players getting older, the possibility of adding a big guy, and the continuity, of having the same coach. But yet there's also the memory of the last 2 years where it's like, well, we've had a lot of talent the last 2 years and haven't seemed to live up to it, so why do we really want to go through this again and get our hopes up? I mean, how are you kind of looking at this as we head into next year?
I don't even know how to look at it anymore, honestly. I mean, this whole thing, at least as it surrounds green stability, it's been wild. I mean, there was, between the chats and just all the information that's been circulating out there, it's just been all over the board, and it changes from 1 hour to the next. I personally heard things that I'm not going to get into, but from people that I really trust, who have been very, very accurate in what's going on, and they have been absolute that this is going to happen. And then an hour later, it's completely off, and we've gone 180 degrees the different direction. The one thing it tells me is it seems like there's probably a lot of hands pulling at the wheel right now. I think that maybe as an institution, we're not exactly sure what the direction is. A lot of people put varied stock in Fred's commitment to Tom, and then just as soon as they did, just as many people pointed out, Fred gave Bill Lynch the exact same vote of confidence a couple weeks before he let him go. And I think that's the only thing he can do when those questions arise, in the middle of the season, and we've still got games to play. I rarely is it ever prudent, I think, to fire a coach in the middle of the season unless something absolutely egregious has happened. So I don't know that he really had another option, but I think it speaks volumes of the fact that he's having to address those in the middle of the season. And, kind of adding to what Alex said, I think the fact that a lot of those concerns persist now, I do kind of get the feeling that we almost need some assurance, if he is indeed going to continue to coach, that is the plan. And I think maybe it would behoove Fred to tell some folks why he believes that, how we're going to get better. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what exactly I want to hear. I just want to hear something more concrete, that this is, in fact, going to be our coach next year. And I think Tom deserves that. That was one of the most remarkable things about the Iowa game is, there's people talking that there could be a resignation or a termination imminent, and then out of the woodwork, you've got 2 5-star big men show up behind the bench. So, good on him for being able to make that happen under those circumstances. But I could certainly imagine that if the recruits aren't aware of it, other schools who are recruiting against us are more likely than not aware of it and are probably telling our recruits exactly what's going on. So it would probably behoove all parties if we're going to continue to ride this horse, that this is our plan and just let's let it go. But it seems like there needs to be some reassurance from the administration one way or another. I'd like to think that I trust Fred's decision-making on this. He's certainly privy to a lot more things than any of us are as far as what's going on. But, man, it sure seems unsure at the moment right now.
And there have been a lot of individual names thrown about, and I'm just wondering, and I'll ask both of you this, Chronic, you first, do you get the sense either way that Coach Crean's future will be based simply on the merit of how Fred views him as a coach, or will it depend on our ability to potentially get some big name that will dictate whether or not a change is made, or even what the perception is of the timing of being able to get some big name.
When you say some big name, are you talking a player or a coach?
No, yeah, talking about a coach. Talking about, potentially replacing Coach Crean because we think we can get a Stevens or some, all the names that have been thrown about, or will it be made simply based on his merit? Or maybe you don't get a sense either way. I don't know.
Let's get the elephant. Let's just address the elephant in the room right now. That's Brad Stevens. I mean, that seems to be the gazillion-dollar question right now is, will Brad Stevens coach here? And honestly, I don't know. I don't know that anybody but Brad Stevens and his family knows if he ever even wants to come back. I mean, he's got a pretty sweet gig right now. He's got a team that was built to tank this year. They've got a truckload of lottery picks lined up, and he's about ready to backdoor himself into the playoffs on a year that was supposed to be a waste. So I don't know. He is certainly a lot of fans' supposed white knight to come save the program and make everything better and return us to a dynasty. It's kind of hard to ignore that. I mean, this is a guy that took a mid-major program and led them to 2 national championship games with a bunch of 3 stars at best for the most part. So I don't. I know a lot of people don't want to let go of that. In the event that we ever found ourselves in a position where we were hiring a coach, sure, I would love to see them go for it. But I don't think Fred's going to necessarily make that decision based off whether Brad, or let's just take that name off the table because I don't see it. But I think he is. I think he is very much going to take the long view, as he said previously. And all of his decisions are going to be made based off the totality of the circumstances and Tom's body of work. I will say now, understanding lawyer talk a little bit, that's a really easy thing to say when you're still in the middle of a process. That we're going to talk about a body of work while the body is still ongoing. But every athletic director does it. The season wraps up, they meet with their coaching staffs, and they talk about where they've been and where they're trying to go. And if the parties are looking for something different, then they talk about that. I don't know. I don't think that Fred is going to hire or fire based solely off of the job market at the very moment. Either he wants Tom here or he doesn't. I think it's a bad idea. Everybody's always talked about that next coach or the next Bob Knight. We've been trying to hire out from underneath that shadow for 15 years now, and we've done a miserable job of it. So maybe it's best just to let that go. And the next time that we find ourselves in the market for a coach, go get the best coach, not necessarily the next night, because you're never going to find it. I think it's a red herring for us. But at the same time, if it's not working out, it's not working out. You need to move. If you've got reasons why you want to part ways with your coach, you do that regardless of who's in the market immediately at the time, and you go out and get the best one available, in my opinion. But I don't know if we're there yet.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, that's clearly going to be storyline number 1 as we go through the offseason until some kind of announcement is made one way or the other, or no announcement is made, and I guess we all just assume. But, Coach Crean's status is not the only status that is up in the air of the guys who comprise this team. There are 3 players whose status seems to be a little bit up in the air, and that's Yogi, Troy, and James Blackman Jr., guys who have all been rumored at one time or another this year as potential NBA draft picks. And so, Alex, I want to bring you in here and get some feedback from you. I mean, Yogi posts on Instagram thanking the fans, and everybody's trying to parse it to see if that's a farewell or just a sign of maturity. And, Troy Williams rumors pop up. Boo Williams, his uncle, said that Troy is, no decision has been made. It's too close to the end of the season. And clearly, again, with all of these, we have to wait till there's some kind of official announcement. But certainly when you look at mock drafts, none of these guys are slam dunk first round picks like Victor was as a junior, where he just skyrocketed up. So that makes it obviously far less obvious. What are you hearing, if anything, about any of those 3 guys and their status for next year?
Not much. I mean, after the game, we asked all of them basically, asked Yogi specifically what kind of his plans were, and he basically just said he was living in the present. I'm sure you saw that video that we posted. I think other people asked Troy and Blackman. I don't really think it's even an option for Blackman to look at the NBA at this point. I saw on Draft Express that he'd fallen completely out of the top 100. He's not even really on the radar at this point. So the other 2, I would say I did trade a text today with somebody who is familiar with, kind of, let's just say works with an NBA team. And I kind of asked for his opinion on both guys, and what I was told on Yogi was he's kind of viewed maybe as similar to maybe like a Peyton Siva or Russ Smith as far as the draft goes. Second round guy might be a ceiling. And then Troy, the consensus there was, maybe a guy that a team would take a second round chance on this year just because of the upside, but at this point not ready to play in the NBA. So with both of those guys, I think Yogi obviously is the one that seems more realistic as far as being able to do it, just because the potential of him graduating, if he's kind of decided that he's ready to go make a career out of playing basketball, I don't really think he has a lot to gain as far as boosting his stock by coming back another year, just because he's not gonna grow. Whereas with Troy, there's a lot more that he can add to his game to kind of maybe change the way that he's viewed as a prospect at the next level. Whereas Yogi's kind of, I don't want to say he's a finished product, but he's going to be the same size in a year from now. So it's really just Troy. The thing with Troy is, to me, he just seems like he's the consistency is just not there to be an NBA player at this point. He's got to definitely get better defensively, add a more consistent jump shot, and just learn that he can't show up 65% of the time. He's got to play 100% of the time. I feel like there's a lot of games where this season that he just disappeared, and it really hurt Indiana. And if an NBA team is going to invest money in a guy, they want to know, especially first round money, they want to know that they're getting a guy that they can count on for production. And at this point with Troy, I just don't see it being there. The talent's there, but I think he's a guy that if he comes back and puts the work in, could definitely be a first round pick in a year from now. Whereas with Yogi, I just don't necessarily believe that coming back for another year is really going to change his stock all that much.
And in terms of recruiting, obviously Indiana's in the mix for Thomas Bryant, apparently still in the mix for Thon Maker. Are you hearing anything there? Because those will be the other two big announcements either way that will help us dictate what the roster is heading into next year.
Well, Indiana obviously still feels like they're in the race for Thon Maker because they were out watching him last night. It's pretty tough to get any information out of that camp. It's pretty much locked down at this point. His guardian Ed Smith, who's helped bring him over from Australia, kind of runs everything there and is going to be heavily involved in the decision-making process. I know Thon's given some interviews, but he really doesn't say much. Bryant, Jordan checked in on that today, and basically what he was told was expect a decision sometime next month. And you got the McDonald's game coming up later. I think it's middle of next week. Then he's going to play in the Derby Festival game in Louisville, and then he's also going to play in the Jordan Brand game. So he could be a guy that announces, maybe he could be one of those guys that does one of the ESPNU type announcement deals at some point, or announces kind of around one of those all-star events. So I wouldn't expect any firm movement on either one of those guys until at least next month. And Maker isn't even really saying for sure that he's going to be 2015. I mean, everyone's speculating that he is. I think at one point he said he's 70% going to do it. There's going to be coursework and things like that he's got to complete to get into 2015. But, it seems like Indiana's still chasing both guys and feels like they have a shot.
So, and can you clear up real quick just the scholarship numbers? Obviously, Indiana has two guys ready to come in next year, Juwan Morgan, OG Anunoby. Where do we stand currently in terms of scholarships? And if a guy like Thomas Bryant commits, how many guys currently under scholarship might not be able to be under scholarship to make that happen?
Well, as of right now, if everyone were to come back, assuming Devin Davis is able to come back next season and play, which I think the plan seems to be that, based on what I saw him do in Omaha. It was out there running up and down, dunking, things like that. I would assume that he wants to come back and play. So put everything down on paper at this point. It's 15 guys if everyone was to come back, and then it's 16 if they were to get another commit, and the limit's 13. So this is one thing I kind of addressed in the mailbag today was I've always kind of said these situations work themselves out, but I think that explanation has kind of gotten to the end of the line with some IU fans as far as just, I think Chronic kind of brought this up earlier with the kind of building continuity on a year-over-year basis. If you're constantly churning the roster and having new faces, it's really hard to develop any veteran leadership on a team. I mean, if guys are just coming in for a year and then leaving and you're replacing them with more freshmen, you're really putting I don't know the best way to put this. It's just a difficult way to kind of sustain any type of success. And obviously, 2 guys are going to be gone next season. It could be guys going to the NBA. It could be transfers. It could be, I guess those are really the only 2 options. But obviously, there's going to have to be some numbers working out. And Indiana fans, I think, have gotten to the point now where they're just not happy with kind of how the roster turns worked, and the fact that every year there's guys leaving the program for whatever reason. Last year, I would argue that it worked out, not getting rid of, but Austin Hetherington and Jeremy Hallwell leaving actually I think turned out to be a positive, just because they got Zeisloft into the program, and the freshmen I feel like upgraded the perimeter. But this year, there's always the question of kind of, what happens with Jeremiah April and Tim Priller. No one really wants to go there, but you'd hate to see those guys who kind of came on at the last minute for 1 year, just be maybe I don't want to say pushed out the door, but told that they're not really going to play. And at that point, do they decide to stick it out, or do they go somewhere else? So it's just an uncomfortable kind of situation to have to address every year. And I do think there's something to the fact that there's going to be transfers. Guys don't. I mean, you've seen it on Twitter today. Jeff Goodman tweeted out 30 or 40 guys that were leaving schools, but to have it happen every year, it's just kind of I think a difficult way to sustain success.
Yeah, I hate this topic. I hate it when it comes up every year. But I hate the impact that it has on stability. I don't know, just the lack of integrity it feels like almost to promise a guy a scholarship and then not necessarily maybe take it away, but kind of push him out the door, like you said, Alex. It gives me a slimy feeling. I've never liked it, and I know this idea of it works itself out, and to some extent it has with guys going pro. But there seems like there may be a logjam this year. And Chronic, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it generally, but also, the big change this year is there was that athlete Bill of Rights. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but that was signed where, Fred Glass basically said if a guy is given a 4-year scholarship, he will keep that scholarship. And I think it seems like there may be some gray area or just something that's not quite fully understood about whether that could be converted to an academic scholarship, and maybe it's not an athletic promise. Do you know how that's going to work, and if that will impact what happens this year? If we have to free up 2-3 scholarships again?
I don't specifically have the information as far as what happens if, because they don't give 4-year scholarships. First of all, every scholarship is renewed on an annual basis. That's the way the agreement works from the start. I have a feeling, I've talked to some players who are actually recruited that have said, that's certainly not something that's being highlighted in the recruiting process. The pitch is, you come here, you give your 4 years or however many much you have availability and yada yada, sunshine and rainbows type stuff. But it doesn't always work out that way. So I'm not sure exactly how this is intended to operate in the event that the coaching staff decides that they want to go in a different direction for player performance. I do know that the Bill of Rights specifically says that you will not lose your scholarship for athletic performance, among other things. I don't know how exactly that works. I'm not sure how how they get around that, because in the past that has been a sticking point. I know they crafted this thing very carefully, and I was pretty impressed with the fact they were willing to make that commitment, or all those commitments, I should say, because there's quite a few things that are wrapped up in that. I'm not exactly sure, and I don't know that we necessarily want to see how that gets pushed. In years past, it seems like a lot of the partings have been mutual. Some maybe a little more so or less so than others. The thing that stands out, though, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of guys who are necessarily, dying to jump ship right now. If anybody was going to transfer this season, I mean, if you're looking at this squad and like, okay, you could tell last year Hollowell just seemed miserable. He did not look like he wanted to wear the Indiana jersey anymore. You can maybe argue whether he ever did. But that certainly seemed predictable. I don't know that there's necessarily any of those guys that you can just look at right now as far as, someone who doesn't seem as though they want to be here. You can certainly speculate on who you think would get washed out in the event that we had an upgrade in talent available to us. Maybe Stan, but I think he was the only one that came out and gave a definitive answer in Omaha and said, why would I leave? So I'm not exactly sure. I don't know how this is going to work out, It's always unfortunate. I mean, if you recall, I think it was April's mom was on a fast when we offered him a scholarship. She was fasting, praying for an answer on her son's future. I would hate to see an IU roster next year without Tim Priller. I mean, that would be like Justin Bieber hanging up the mic and shutting it down. I don't know if the student section would ever recover from that. I don't know. To borrow the words from Tom, I mean, these things always seem to work themselves out. So I suppose we'll see sooner than later. I mean, my guess would be that if it's not immediate, like I figured maybe today or possibly tomorrow, if somebody's got something that's weighing them down, they're going to want to get it off their shoulders as quickly as possible. We just saw that with the women's basketball team. My hunch would be it'd probably be later in the year, maybe as a commitment from another player draws nearer. In the past, it seems like a lot of guys that wanted to wear that Indiana basketball player hat going into Little 5 week, and then afterwards, it's something that they're more willing to shed. I don't know. I'm interested to see how this thing works out, though.
Yeah, and you're right. Most scholarships are already year to year, and that's the big thing. As I'm just reading it here of this Athlete Bill of Rights, is that Indiana will commit to multi-year scholarships instead of the year-to-year renewals that are traditionally used in college athletics. So, it's going to be interesting. I mean, that was a bold move by Fred, and I applauded it. I mean, I think it was a great move. I hope we fulfill it in its spirit, not just by the letter or kind of weaseling out of there. Because I think it's easy to say, hey, clearly we want a Thomas Bryant over Jeremiah April, right? And yeah, I suppose in strict basketball terms, you want that more talented guy, but at the cost of what? At the cost of the integrity of your program. And we've seen guys who didn't look like they had any business in IU uniform as a freshman turn into pretty good players as a senior. Larry Richardson comes to mind as a guy who seemed, kind of hopeless at the beginning and turned into a pretty good player. And sometimes you don't know how guys develop, and obviously we don't know how hard guys work behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff, and there's a lot of unknowns, but I don't know. I hate the topic, and I hate that we're going to be clearly facing it now, at least with 2 and possibly with 3, so I guess we'll just have to kind of see how that shakes out. So, Chronic, let me ask you this. As we look forward, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems maybe the safest of assumptions is that Coach Crean is back. No reason really to speculate on Bryant, but we should have most of the core of this team back. Maybe one guy leaves, maybe a Yogi leaves or something like that, but we should have most, if not all, of this team back, which had its strengths, had its weaknesses clearly, but you would think that with another year together, another year of continuity of growth, there should be some improvement. I guess my question to you is, what have you seen over these last 7 years or even these last couple of years from the program from Coach Crean to enter a season like that with confidence that it will be appreciably better than what we saw this year?
I mean, I think the obvious answer there is the Cody era. I mean, you knew when he came in 2011, 2012 season that he was going to fill a big hole in this roster. And then he brought some talent in around him after in the subsequent class, at least as far as Yogi's concerned, I guess. But you look at those 2 years, and you knew that you could see it coming together, both in the talent we had coming in and the development. I mean, I still vividly remember those moments when Vic was a freshman, where you're like, whoa, he just did that. I mean, this is a guy who had some significant hurdles to clear when he set foot on campus, and he showed you those glimpses. And then his sophomore year, you really saw the ceiling. And then, by midway through the non-conference of his junior year, I think I was putting him in the draft at that point. I was out there pretty early on that, if I recall. That certainly gave me confidence. We've also seen, we've seen a regression on a lot of fronts. While the offense improved significantly from where it was last year, the defense not only regressed worse than last year's, but this year's efficiency was as bad as we've seen under Crean. And, of all the issues I've had with the play this year, this has given me nightmares and kept me up. I mean, this has made me physically sick almost at times. Maybe it was a Jameson or a combination, I don't know. But when you think about it, this is a team that's got 3 guys who, or at least are popping up on draft boards. You've got a couple of burger boys in the backcourt, and our defense is less efficient than the roster that included Devin Dumas, Brett Finkelmeyer, Tom Pritchard, freshman Verdell Jones, on down the line. I mean, it's almost inconceivable that they could defend as poorly as they did this year. And so much of it got made about the height issue, but it went so much further than the height. I mean, our biggest liabilities, I think, were really at the backcourt and our inability to even deny a guy from driving the lane on us time and time and time and time again. In order to shore some of that stuff up, you're talking about individual players having to make a leap that's probably greater than anything we've ever seen from a development standpoint in IU. I mean, if you want to look at Victor's sophomore to junior year leap, it's going to take something of a greater magnitude than that from a lot of these guys in order to shore up some of the stuff we saw on the defensive end of the ball. That's really problematic to me. I mean, I don't know exactly how they do that. I don't know exactly what Crean's approach is. I would hope to God it's not, delving further into this netherworld of man to zone to man defenses or some of the schemes that we employed. I don't know. I have no idea. I just know that of all the things that I've really struggled to stomach, watching this team defend gave me more pangs than the overall ball we saw in his first 2 years, and that's really saying something.
Yeah, and clearly improvement on the defensive end is where any potential improvement for next season has to go. I mean, Alex, as you look toward next season, and it's clearly speculative with not quite knowing who all is going to be on the roster, but, do you think that this, like Chronic mentioned, is this something where the guys on the team just have to internally take defense more seriously or take it more personally, or do you see the main issue being from the coaches? Because, I mean, it does seem like you could argue that, that team with Victor and with Cody and with Jordan Hulls and, maybe those guys at least seem from a distance to have a little more commitment on that end of the floor maybe than some of these guys that we've seen now. And is that just a program accountability issue, or is that just the nature of the guys who are in the program, do you think?
I think it's, a totally across the board. I mean, it's gotta be, obviously we don't see practice. We don't know what's being taught. We don't know what's being emphasized. But, I mean, I think just look at kind of like last year, what we were all talking about. Like this time last year, we were all talking about the turnovers, all right? And then the turnovers kind of went to the, off to the back page. We didn't really talk about it this year because it was improved, but then it was at the cost of the defense, I guess. So it's almost, it's like if it's not one thing, it's something else. And I think that's one thing that really frustrates a lot of people who follow the program closely. And to me, the defense, I I agree with Chronic. It wasn't a big man problem because look at Wichita State. They don't have a big man, and they have a top 20 defense nationally. Obviously, it helps if you have a big man at the rim that can block shots and um, kind of act as a deterrent. It doesn't really hurt you as much if you're getting beat off the dribble. But I agree that the problem was started on the perimeter and was mainly on the perimeter. So it's really tough to say who exactly are kind of what the disconnect was. Just to me, it was just kind of odd to watch how it really never got better with any consistency. It did feel like there was a couple of games where they played defense better and were more intense about it. So I guess that the Northwestern game the second time around kind of comes to mind because the first Northwestern game, I was at both of those games. The first one, it was like they were not engaged at all defensively. And the second time, they played with urgency and got stops. So I'm not saying it's a problem that can't be fixed, but it's obviously kind of going to have to be rebuilt from the ground as far as figuring out the identity of what you want to do defensively. The whole, changing defenses thing was something that really never gained much traction or led to any improvement. So it's obviously going to be the determining factor in just how good this team can be, because if most of the guys come back, the offense should still be pretty good, but if the defense doesn't get considerably better, you're looking at I think a similar season, especially if you don't add a big man.
Yeah. I mean, Chronic, what kind of sense do you get that the fan base would kind of go into next year with? If Tom Crean is still a coach, if we have kind of this same group, because I go back and forth myself just as I look at it. On the one hand, it's like, hey, again, we could have this continuity and the experience and a guy like Yogi and a lot of talent, but then I always kind of stop and it's like, well, the expectations will be high again, but we've never quite been that good at living up to the expectations. And so I feel like a season that, independent, you look at it, it could be quite hopeful. I just wonder if fans will approach it that way with the status quo, simply after kind of the disappointment of the last couple years, and even how the season ended 3 years ago.
There's one theme that keeps coming up here, is in a lot of the conversations I've been having, is people are trying to reconcile their feelings about this season, and for all the frustrations and all the uncertainty. The one thing that really stands out to me is you can get away with a lot of BS in Indiana. I mean, Hoosiers will buy all sorts of nonsense. I think our body politic is a great example right now. But one thing you absolutely cannot sell is bad hoops. And people, I think that's maybe one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is, even though the offense, we had, at times the offense was gorgeous. It was moving. The shots were falling. It's really pretty to see that many shooters out there on the floor sharing the ball and knocking down looks. But I think most Hoosiers recognize that's half the game. And I think just as many Hoosiers will recognize that that's not necessarily the half that's going to win you championships or get you deep into the postseason either. Eventually you're going to have to get stops because you're always going to run into similarly equipped offenses. So I think that trepidation going into next year is very justified. It's very valid. I once had a coach, one of my first basketball coaches, as a matter of fact, who I credit with so much of my whole athletic experience in sports beyond basketball. He welcomed me into a new community and put me on a travel team when I really had no business. But he was a defensive first coach, and one of the things he always preached to us is, why not a lot of teams play good defense? Because it's hard and there's no glory in it. Mm-hmm. If it was easy and everybody got famous playing it, everybody would want to do it better. It really comes down to fundamentals and just determination not to get beat. There's a lot of pride involved in playing really good defense. And, as much as this team wants to to label themselves as overachievers or whatever else. I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to prove to people that they want it more than the other team. And that's going to have to show up on the defensive end. I mean, you could certainly make the argument that ball movement represents that. I do agree with that. But again, that's only half the game. So I'm really looking forward to him coming out next year and showing us that they've addressed that liability. As Alex mentioned, it was turnovers previously. And, credit where credit's due. They did a great job of shoring that up this year for the most part. But at the end of the day, unless they can prove to fans that they have the ability to go out there and play some semblance of defense, I mean, better than the next to worst team in the Big Ten, they're going to be hard-pressed to get back a lot of that support that maybe they've lost or that's on the fence right now. So, if I'm Tom Crean, we spend about the first half of the summer with our hands tied behind our back, and we work on nothing but our footwork because this team struggled mightily just to keep a man between the ball and the hoop. And at the end of the day, that's the most fundamental element of defense, and we had a hell of a time doing that on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, and you just hope that it doesn't become a kind of a game of whack-a-mole, which just seems like it's been the last 2 years where, last year we're good at rebounding and defense and we can't shoot, and this year we can shoot and we can't really defend and our rebounding is inconsistent. Alex, let me ask you, and we won't go too much longer tonight because it's almost been an hour, and I know it's getting late there on the East Coast, but let me ask you, Alex, I mean, do you think it's something that can be just changed internally with these guys that we have, or do you think there needs to be kind of a bigger philosophical change? I mean, and I ask this because obviously this time of year, a lot of talk about Tom Izzo comes up, and Tom Crean is clearly a disciple of Tom Izzo, and I mean, coached under him for a while, was there when he won the national championship. And the irony there is that the things that Crean seems to get criticized for are some of the things that Izzo is so good at, which is, kind of having that program stability and, having the upperclassmen to kind of pass down the culture from one team to the next. And it seemed like we caught lightning in the bottle there, Crean's fourth and fifth years, or we had that experience combined with some talent. It all worked. And it's like when there was that exodus after the fifth year, he hasn't been able to get that back these last couple of years. And then you combine that with, fading at the end of the year instead of reaching the crescendo at the end of the year like Izzo does. And, and those comparisons are pretty easy to make. Do you think that it's something inherent in the program and how it's run, or is this the kind of thing that could get better just with a different emphasis next year?
Wow, that's a tough question. I don't. The defense to me is basically, everything Chronic just said. I agree with. A lot of it's pride, a lot of it's fundamentals, a lot of it's determination. I'd like to say that those things can be fixed. I'd like to say that those are things that are going to be heavily emphasized in the off season, but it's asking a lot for a team to make a jump from being ranked in the 200s in defense with basically the same personnel to expect that group to jump in, to even be in the top 100. I mean, that's just a lot, really to ask. So I don't, it's a tough question. I don't know if the solution is to maybe, I know there's assistant coaching spot open. Do you go outside and do you look at somebody who has some type of philosophy on defense that maybe can bring a different perspective that you bring in? Do you maybe go outside? Do you get someone from the outside that can maybe do some consulting or kind of look at kind of what can be done to fix things? Is it individual accountability with the players? I mean, there's just so many different ways to look at it, and it's obviously kind of the cloud hanging over at this point as far as what this team can be next year. If significant improvement can be made, there's obviously reasons for optimism. I'm just not sure what specifically has to change because I don't know that I don't know. It's so hard to kind of tell what goes on behind the scenes, what's being taught. If it's from what I mean, I can't look at one guy on this team this past year and say that guy played defense well with any consistency. I mean, the year before I thought Yogi was a really good defender. This year I didn't think he was very good. I look at a guy like Troy Williams or James Blackman and I say, James Blackman's got long arms, pretty good athleticism. I look at Troy Williams, I say he's a better athlete than Victor, and he should be a really good defender, but neither one of those guys are. So I think it's going to have to be a total, I guess, rebuild of the defense from the top with the coaching and all the way down to the players. I mean, it's gonna have to be. Otherwise, you're looking at another season where you're going to have to shoot people to win, and when you get into March, as we've seen with Tom Izzo, grit, toughness, and getting stops is what wins, and this Indiana team just didn't have that with any consistency.
I thought the one guy who seemed to at least know where he was supposed to be was Colin Hartman, and I actually thought he played really good defense against Wichita State, and his foul trouble really hurt because he's the one guy. He doesn't make the spectacular plays, but he gets himself in the right position to force a tough shot that would have been a layup, and so I think if maybe as he maybe gets another year and can take on more of a leadership role, perhaps that can help just by example. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, the defense was clearly atrocious. And I want to get both your sense on this before I move to a final question. I mean, Alex, I can see kind of going into next year going so many ways where there's a group of fans that, if it's Crean coaching and it's kind of the same group that will just be, Eeyores all preseason predicting, a 14-18 finish and no chance, and then another group that think this could be a national title contender, just because there's experience and all the talent. And I mean, I guess maybe there isn't really a question here. I guess the truth will probably lie somewhere in the middle. But it's just kind of, I think, it just shows kind of where the fan base is. That there's just it's so hard to find consensus, except for the fact that the defense was bad. There was clearly consensus on that. But in terms of expectations going into next year, I can see it going so widely and varying so much, which does lead me into my final question. And Chronicle, go to you first, then Alex. As you look toward this offseason, and maybe you can't answer this in specifics, maybe you can only answer it in general terms, but what will it take for you to consider this off season to be a success and to kind of make you feel good going into next year?
No more regression, no more losses, nothing that gives the fans more reason to be any more apathetic or disengaged than they currently feel right now. And that's really my biggest concern going into this offseason, with so much speculation regarding the coaching and who's coming back and just the overall direction of the program. I'm very worried that it's going to be a really, really long 6 months. If you have any major defections, I mean, if you lose any starters, and there may be some starters that could be more easily replaced than others, but after last year, I remember making that I photoshopped the team calendar and I blacked out all the faces that were no longer returning, and I finished it and I kind of took a step back and I looked at it and it scared the shit out of me because you realize that like 2/3 of the squad is gone, and you've never seen, short of maybe Kentucky, any team go through roster turnover that significant and have very much success the next year. I don't want to have to do that again. I don't want to do that again. I prefer not to. I choose not to because it really scared me.
Hey, can I ask you a question here real quick on that topic, Chronic? I mean, is it time to stop using that as an excuse? Because, again, in the micro level, it's easy to say there's all this roster turnover, there's youth, but at some point that's a program issue. So, at what point do we kind of stop excusing lower standards going into a season because of that? And do we kind of hold that standard to, hey, this is Indiana, we should have this stability to where we're not fearful of this every year?
I mean, at this point, after 7 years, however you want to count the first couple of years, I'd say we're very fairly at the point where our history says we are who we are. You know what I mean? We are a team that has a high rate of roster turnover for a number of reasons, but that's the program that we have. The challenge is that when you want to operate on that and then still consistently expect, positive outcomes at the end of the season, that's a really, really tough game to play. I mean, you look at the Calipari for Coach of the Year debate going on right now, and as much as it pains me to say, you got to give the guy credit where credit's due. However he may be assembling those rosters, he's restocking a very rich shelf very frequently and having a very high degree of success doing so. And I'm by no means endorsing that strategy, because I think there's probably some nefarious forces at play that make that happen. But without even getting into that, we have to figure out who we want to be. And this is something that we've hit on before. So much with this program changed when Cody came. We went from going after more of those 4-year guys or 3-year guys or whatever, but guys that were going to stick with the program, that were going to build that continuity and establish a foundation that future classes could keep building on. And for a number of reasons, now that foundation's been completely eroded, and we're having to constantly build on less stable foundations and still expecting not just the same, but even better than before. I don't know how you manage that. For each one of the kids that's left, there's been a number of reasons behind each one of them. Some related, many not. So it's really difficult to point to one thing or another and say this is to blame for this. But at the end of the day, we are who we are, and we're a team that loses a lot of guys on average every offseason. So, you can't deny that. And that's certainly been an obstacle. I mean, if you look at last season, if you look at this season, I think almost all of us would agree that with a more stable turnover in the roster, a lot of these problems don't happen, but that's not the way it's been. And I think going into this offseason, that's my biggest concern. As history says, some of the biggest fireworks of the season are still yet to come. So let's just pray that we can get through this with as little damage as possible and emerge in the best shape as we can come Hoosier hysteria. But history says it's not going to be anywhere close to what we expect.
Yeah, and you hit on a big point there, which is when you look at the programs that are able to succeed with high roster turnover, they're pulling in top 10 recruiting classes every single year to replenish the talent. And if you're not going to do that, then it makes it very hard to have any sort of stable success without a stable roster. Like kind of a Michigan State does, to use them as the example, where they've got the seniors who go through. Maybe they don't get the top level recruits, but they compensate with program stability. And we seem to be, obviously we've gotten McDonald's All-Americans and had some decent, good recruiting classes, but still not the level that will help you compensate for the stability with just overwhelming talent and size and all that. So, somewhere it seems like at least that strategy needs to be kind of honed in a little bit, like you said, to figure out what we are.
Let's take that a step further, too. There was Mark Alicia's his story in the Star last week, I think it was, where he detailed the recruiting expenses of the in-state schools. And if I'm not mistaken, we spent like $740,000, $730,000, almost $750,000 building last year's recruiting class, which it's a huge sum of money. And granted, you've got a James Blackman and Rojo, and God bless them. I don't know where the season goes without them. But that also went out and bought you a Priller and an April and, a Hotzel. He's certainly opened the door for criticism, for questioning of maybe some of these techniques or these strategies, if you will, in his roster building and his team building and the way he's recruiting for it. So, I don't know. I found that really interesting, though.
Yeah, and and I think another thing too is to kind of get our focus in Indiana back too. I think that's where consistent Indiana teams have been built on Indiana kids, obviously, and that it doesn't. I guess, do you get that sense that our stronghold in Indiana? It certainly seems strong there with Cody and with the movement and all of that, but it seems like that's something that could not only could that help the recruiting budget clearly, but it also seems reasonable and smart because there's so many good players. Just look around the NCAA tournament to how many good Indiana kids are out there, and you can't help but have a little bit of a sense of longing that some of those guys didn't end up here.
It's not just that, too. Look at where they're going. When you see Trey Lyles on Kentucky, when you see a lot of the guys in the 15 class and the 16 class that are heavy leans towards other Big Ten schools. Not only is that not helping your program, but you're watching your enemies get stronger off the fruits being grown in your own backyard. And that's certainly something, that's a matter of philosophy. It's a matter of contention with a lot of folks. But common knowledge is always said, if you're going to win at Indiana, you need to win with it, some reasonable degree of Indiana boys. And in this day and age, if you're not, somebody else is going to. And more often than not, they might be in your conference or just across the river from you. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't know that. I mean, Alex knows this front way better than I will ever portend to. But I'm not sure that we've got a whole lot coming in right now in state.
Yeah, Alex. What does the kind of the recruiting outlook look like with in-state guys over the next couple of years?
Well, 2016, really, I guess the main guy they're focused on would be Joey Brunk out of Southport. Not really a whole lot else in 2016 than 2017 is where it gets loaded. I think there's 4 or 5 kids that are top 100 type talent. So all those kids, I think, have Indiana offers at this point and have been to multiple games this season. But we've kind of seen kids visit often and go elsewhere. So it's really hard to tell kind of where those situations are going to head. But this is a pivotal spring and summer for recruiting for those guys. So I think a lot of schools will start digging deeper into 2017 and making moves on some of those kids like Paul Scruggs and Chris Wilkes and a couple of the others that Indiana obviously would like to have and get. So 2016, like I said, it's not a lot, but 2017 is loaded and could really be a class that if Indiana were to convert on a lot of the top guys could really boost its talent level up considerably.
Yeah, well, and for the most part, when we have, that has led to good, good sequences of years for Indiana, and when we haven't, sometimes those recruiting classes and those guys haven't quite lived up to the expectations that maybe we had. So I know there's a lot of questions, and we weren't able to get to them all. I do appreciate all of you asking, and we could probably stay on here and talk for hours and hours and hours, but it is getting late, so we will wrap this up for tonight. Did you have anything else you want to add, Chronic, before we close up?
Oh, no, not at all. That was an inadvertent mic hit. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hey, I do want to add one thing, though. Give credit where credit's due. Alex is not only doing this podcast, but he's out here working the coaching carousel beat as well. So he's a multitasker. The kid's a gamer.
He is, definitely. He is definitely a gamer. And you all are gamers, too, for joining us on short notice. Like I said, we were just having a fun Twitter chat, decided to throw this up. And so thanks to Alex, thanks to Chronic for coming on here tonight. And we'll be having plenty more of these episodes as we go throughout the season. I think, going into the offseason post-Year 7 of the Tom Crean era, I think we all hope that maybe there would be a little more stability. We wouldn't be talking about coach stuff, and we'd be more talking about how nice the next banner that we hang will be. Unfortunately, that hasn't been what's in the cards for the last couple of years, and it isn't quite the stability that we want. So I think, Chronic, I echo what you said. Simply, you kind of hope you can get through this season without anything else that derails the redevelopment of optimism. I think the way this season ended kind of left people with a little bit of sour taste in their mouth, and hopefully we get some positive news, whether it's a big commitment or just a solid off-season of work, whatever it is, or still a coaching change. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with this, so it's a lot of speculation, which is why the title of the show is Speculation Season Begins. And we're all just left to kind of talk about what we saw, what we hope to see in the future, and hopefully what we see in the future more closely resembles what we expect out of Indiana basketball next year than what we got this past year. But that remains to be seen. We'll have plenty more episodes for you coming up. So stay tuned. At Assembly Call, follow us. We'll always announce the new episodes there. And, of course, follow Alex at Inside the Hall and Chronic Hoosier at Chronic Hoosier. All right, everybody. We will talk to you next time on the Assembly Call.